Welcome into the GigEm247 Sports Podcast. I am Andrew Hattersley, joined as always by Carter Karels. Carter, we're really in the midst of spring ball now. We had the pro day on Tuesday as we're recording this, and lot to get to on that front. How you been? How you been?
Good, man. Just celebrated a birthday. Went back
Yeah, well,
home,
happy
and
birthday.
yeah, thank you. So it's been a fun couple of weeks. Man, it's been great to have spring football back and see this team in person, and definitely a lot of early first impressions I've taken away, and some impressive things I've seen, a couple concerning things. So your typical spring football kind of eye test look at things. So it's just been good.
No doubt, and I think one of the things with spring ball is it moves fast. Once it gets here, like it's already in the, we're already now into the second week. Guys are in pads. They're roughly about a third of the way through spring ball already, and so the spring game is right around the corner. Starting with the pro day, obviously A&M had a couple guys in that. Current players Jalen Jones, Antonio Johnson, and Devon Achane, and then a couple former players coming back as well. What'd you take away from the day with those guys working out?
Biggest thing for me really was Devon A-Chain. I think he was the most interesting player there. I mean, everyone loves him, Devon A-Chain, with how fast he is, and just whenever you can see a little guy play good at football, like it's pretty fun to watch. But with him, it's certainly interesting thinking about, okay, what will he be in the NFL? And that was
Mm-hmm.
kind of the focus of the day, where you see him start off doing running back drills, then you start seeing him do receiver drills where he's running routes and catching passes. And when we talked to him afterwards, he said that teams have asked him about playing receiver and whether he would accept that role and whether he thinks he could do that role. And you look at the last two seasons he's been at A&M, he caught 60 passes. So certainly he showed that he can at least be serviceable in that area. Watching him in those drills, though, I was very impressed just seeing his hands. He was hauling in a lot of hard balls. I mean, again, it's against air, so it's not like it was a simulated game situation. But sometimes you go in these spring drill or these pro day drills, and these running backs catch passes, but they're not overly impressive. A-Chain did impress me in that regard. So that was the big thing I was looking at when you try to project who this player will be. He's not a guy who size-wise you think will be able to take the pounding. I mean, we've even seen the biggest of running backs, the strongest of running backs, Ezekiel Elliott, embrace that pounding and deliver that pounding. And then, 4 or 5 years later, they wear down. So you don't want to see that role for A-Chain. You'd rather him be kind of this versatile guy that does a lot of things, or maybe even transition to wide receiver full time, like the speedy guy on the Chiefs a few years ago, Tyreek Hill did. So,
Mm-hmm.
anyways, there's a lot of ways to look at it, but I thought he was the most fascinating. Antonio Johnson and Jalen Jones, more of a traditional pro day for them. With Antonio Johnson, the teams really like his versatility, his ability to play in the box, play free, play in the slot, cover the best guy, offer run support, blitz off the edge. I mean, the guy can do it all. That's what teams really love about him. With Jalen Jones, just from my observation, his last year was really where he came on. I mean, he always was playing. He got immediate playing time. But, as Jimbo Fisher told us, he kind of was dealing with hamstring injuries and wasn't always 100%. Last year was the year that he finally put it all together and showed that he can be one of the better quarters in the SEC. And then the last thing to note with Jalen Jones, he ran a 4.440 at Pro Day. He ran a 4.57 40 at the Combine. I know a lot of people probably hear that and they say, well, it's a pro day. It's not a laser time.
Yeah.
Like, do we think that this kid in a span of a month really became 0.17 seconds faster? I don't know. I'm not going to be the judge of that. It's not like I had a stopwatch and was right next to them when they were running it. So I didn't really have the angle to where I could just time it. But
Yeah.
this was timed by pro scouts who have done this for several years. And it's at least a big enough difference to think, wow, I mean, he may have made a lot more money on that day, because that's obviously a huge difference in a 40 time. So if anyone had the pro day performance where you thought, wow, they may have improved their draft stock, it's probably Jalen Jones.
I was going to be my next question on guys that had kind of helped themselves the most, and it might well be Jalen Jones. And it was interesting to hear Fisher kind of wade into the debate that a lot of A&M fans I feel like have had dating back to when Jalen Jones was in high school about whether he's a corner or whether he's a safety. I know a lot of A&M fans felt like he would be better served as a safety. And Jimbo Fisher also said, look, he could go back there potentially later in his career once it could allow him to extend his career for a couple more years. And he's right. It's a position I feel like Jalen Jones could go back and play. And to his point about Antonio Johnson, he is playing a lot of those speedy, quick guys when he's at the nickel spot, and that's a tough position to put a guy like Antonio Johnson in. But he really thrived in that role, especially over the last 2 years. Really became the leader of that defense. It's going to be a big void that A&M has to kind of fill. And yeah, on Devon Achane, 65 receptions for 554 yards. Over his time at A&M. And, I think he is a guy that's really comfortable catching passes out of the backfield, can be a special teams guy. That we've obviously seen that with the win over Alabama. He can change a game in a hurry with a kick return, punt return. I think he could be really dynamic on that front as well. And probably going to be one of those guys that I don't think minds at all moving out to different spots, and is really comfortable playing, whether it's running through the tackles, whether it's as a receiver. I think he'd be really comfortable on that front. And it is interesting on the 40 times you mentioned that, and it's one of the reasons that sometimes high school coaches encourage kids not to maybe run a 40 if they're out at a camp, because so much of it sometimes is technique. How do you get off on a start, and that can also account for a little bit of the timing change. If you don't get off to a good start, or your technique isn't quite where it needs to be, there's more to it than just speed. So it's one of those things you really have to train for and fine tune that stuff, and it can make a big difference. But I certainly think, in on that front, it's A&M's had some disappointing pro days. I feel like the last couple of years with guys that maybe didn't test that well. But I feel like this one, there was no glaring example of like, man, they really didn't test that well, or the numbers, and on Jalen Jones' front, especially with his 40 time improving. Feel like all three guys probably helped themselves to some extent.
Yeah, there wasn't a huge change. I know both guys, all three guys, I believe, ran the shuttle, and I don't think
Yeah.
any of them ran it at the combine. If they did, it wasn't a huge difference. Most of the guys only did a couple events. I believe Jalen Jones is the one that did the most, but not a huge difference. The only glaring thing really was the 40 time. That was the biggest thing. But for Achane, why I thought that it was big for him was he was able to get like personal work with the Giants running backs coach, Jeff Nixon, and the Cowboys run game coordinator, Jeff Lasco. So like he was able to kind of work with those guys for 20 minutes, meet with, I believe those were the two running backs coaches there. There were 4 defensive backs coach, 2 special team coaches. And what Achane said in his interview session with us is he said, I'm willing to play wherever. Like, and the fact that I can play not just running back, not just receiver, but also special teams. And then you look at Jalen Jones and Antonio Johnson, those are guys that could play special teams as well. So, I mean, it's one of those things where your value increases the more you can be used. In some cases, it can be it can be tricky if you're a master of none, right? Like if you're a jack of all trades but a
Yeah.
master of none. But in A-Chain's case, I mean, he's really, really fast. And in the new age of college football or NFL, college football, all that, everyone wants to spread you out. Everyone wants to use speed. We even saw with the Miami Dolphins last year what they were able to do with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle and Raheem Mostert all on the field at once. So I think for A-Chain, what's gonna take is being in the right situation. If he's in this on a team that doesn't really know how to use them, and maybe they think, you're probably just a running back, or yeah, we're going to move you to receiver and not use you as a running back at all, not use you on special teams at all, or they have a bad quarterback or a bad offensive coordinator, that may not work out for them. But if they have an Andy Reid type, a Kyle Shanahan type, a guy that knows how to use every player, a Sean Payton, a guy that Taysom Hill seemed to have no NFL career, and he was able to turn him into something. If he gets in that right situation, he could end up being a prolific gadget type player for an NFL team. So, and that's not a knock on him. But when I say prolific gadget player, you're talking about a really good player that can make a lot of money and play in the NFL for a long time. So that's what's going to be the most fascinating thing about this draft to me. What situation he goes to, who his coach will be, and how they intend to use him.
No doubt. You look at guys like Kenneth Gainwell too on the Eagles last year. They made big time use of him, and obviously Darren Sproles is the name that always comes up as a guy that was able to do a lot of different things, be involved on special teams, be a receiver out of the backfield. They split him out. Yeah, I think you're completely right. If a team knows how to use him and doesn't just use him specifically as a running back or specifically as a receiver or specifically as a punt returner, I think if you look at the entire package with him, you're going to be a lot better off for it. We're going to look at the guys that are going to come back for A&M. As I mentioned, spring practice is rolling on. The team is in pads now and heading into their second week. So we're going to take a quick look at the team when we return from a quick break. Welcome back into the GigEm247 Sports Podcast. I am Hattersley, joined by Carter Karels. We're talking a little spring football. A&M heading into their second week. Now in pads. Carter, what's kind of stood out to you over the first week with the window? We had a couple windows where we were able to see the team. Just what stood out to you?
Yeah, plenty of positives, plenty of negatives for sure. Hopefully I don't talk about this too much, but just my experience covering other programs that were pretty successful. It's cool to play the comparison game. And with A&M, just what I've seen, I don't know if I've seen a defensive line quite like theirs.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking about a defensive line that has Gabriel Brownlow-Dindy as their third string guy right now. That is insane. I mean, that is a guy who could probably start at a lot of Power 5 schools. That is how dominant this and deep this defensive line is. They really have a case for the deepest D line in the country. Couple guys that have stood out. We've talked about Walter Nolan and the weight loss that he's had. 35 pounds lighter this spring compared to last season. Moves a lot quicker. It's hard for me to see how beneficial that weight loss has been for him because we don't see him in competitive settings, one-on-ones and 11-on-11. But he just seems to be more explosive and moving faster. Shamar Turner was another guy that I try to go drill to drill and look at each individual group. And he was a guy that, I watched him blow past a couple. I mean, he's going against walk-ons, but it was just a drill. When I was, oh my gosh, this guy, like, to be that big and move that quickly. That is kind of how I talk about every defensive lineman on that team. Wow, they're big and they're quick. Like, that is a lethal combination, and deep as well. So that really is the highlight for the defense for me. On the offensive side, the highlight really is the quarterback and the playmakers that he has at his disposal. Connor Wigman, again, haven't seen him in a live setting, but you can definitely see the arm strength that he has. You can see kind of the fluid mechanics, like just a very fluid quarterback. He looks like someone who's been in a program for 4 years and knows what he's doing. He doesn't look like a guy who is lacking confidence. And his teammates talk all the time about the poise that he has, and you can definitely see it. Just the way he carries himself, the body language he has, the way he's interacting with his teammates. I really like what I see there. As far as his playmakers, my goodness, I mean, there's so many guys you could mention. I've talked about it before. Really, there's been nobody on the offense that has maybe stood out to me more than Donovan Green. He is another weight changer. Went from 235 to 250, and my gosh, I mean, I expected him to be smaller than he was, but he's actually pretty big, and to see
He's a big guy.
how he moves at 6'4", 250, I just was blown away. And you could see a clear separation between him and the other guys. He's a guy that just doesn't make mistakes in drills, and he moves so fluidly for a guy at his size. Running backs, a lot to like in that room. I don't think there's a clear favorite out of there yet with Amari Daniels, Le'Veon Moss, and Reuben Owens. And then wide receiver, it's such a talented room. We've talked about this before, but it's such a talented room that Anai Smith could be a backup this year. Yeah. That is how talented that room is, with Moose Muhammad, Evan Stewart, and Anai Smith. As we have said before, Evan Stewart suffered an injury. He's in a boot around his right foot. So how long he's out, we'll see. But you're starting to see some of the younger guys in his absence, like Noah Thomas, Micah Tease, Raymond Cottrell. They're starting to get more reps, and I like that room. It's just a little bit thin numbers-wise.
Yeah, I think that's certainly, what you have already in Evan Stewart, and he's a guy that get him healthy for the fall, and I think there is a lot of talent in that room, and we're still waiting to see whether they add to that room. And obviously Gary Bryant's a guy that was in town this past weekend, a USC transfer, really productive year 2 years ago, and then kind of fell out of the rotation at USC this past year, and has made some visits to A&M, Oregon, Miami, Arizona are kind of the four schools that are in the mix for him. So guy that can play outside would obviously join Noah Thomas and give you, I think, two guys that you feel really good about that side of the ball. And that's, from a recruiting standpoint, that's, if you're looking at guys that can impact the 2023 team, he'd be one. And then Shamar Kirk is going to visit for the spring game, a junior college receiver out of California. So I still think they could add some depth to that room, and that'll certainly be one thing to watch. You mentioned Gabriel Brownlow-Dindy, and that's an interesting one, because I do feel like he sometimes, people maybe forget that he was a 5-star defensive lineman. Obviously, last year had the unfortunate break where he gets hurt in the Under Armour All-American game, which kind of sets him back his freshman year. And I think a lot of fans are going to be really excited to see what he does in the spring game, in this fall, because he could really be another guy that factors into that room. I've had the opportunity to see Shamar Turner for a long time now, and he is a big, powerful player that I think hasn't really had that breakout year yet. I think you're kind of looking at maybe this year being that guy that can really break down on that defensive line. McKinley Jackson, having him healthy and in for a full year will certainly be beneficial as kind of that run stopper in the middle. And just a recruiting note there, A&M did also have Tank Booker on campus, which I thought, what do you make of that? Do you feel like this room still needs a guy, in the middle there, or what did you make of them bringing him in for a visit this weekend?
Yeah, I know. There's a lot of hoopla about that, but yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
it's a room where you don't need numbers until you do. You
yeah,
rely on so many guys rotationally that a lot of teams will end up playing 10 linemen, defensive linemen in a game.
mhm.
So it doesn't hurt to add numbers, but I think you look elsewhere on this roster and you say, maybe prioritize these positions first because I think they need some linebackers, they need some cornerbacks, they need some
Yep.
offensive linemen, they need some receivers. Those are the four that you look at and say, okay, they got to add at these spots. They really like this guy, then okay, cool. But I think they're fairly set at that position.
No doubt. And they got some spots to use, and I think they've got enough guys that they can really turn to on campus. Obviously, if they do opt to bring in a veteran presence that they feel might be serviceable in the mud, because obviously the run defense was one of the worst in the SEC last year. So if they feel like they need another guy to really shore up that group, I think it can't hurt. They've got spots to use, especially this year. Tony Grimes, another one. I wanted to get your thoughts now that you've had a couple days to see him. Well, what's been your thoughts on him and Sam McCall?
Yeah, Tony Grimes is 100% going to be a starter this year, no question. Don't even ask. He's a starter. Like there's not a question there. He
Yeah.
brings the starting experience. I think 28 games he started in his career. He was good enough in 2021 to be an honorable mention OACC guy. You could see it, just the athleticism, the long arms that he's got. Like he's a very fluid athlete. I like what I've seen in him. Sam McCall's another guy that I look at and think, man, this guy, if A&M can just figure out the right spot for him, he's got to be something for you because, I covered him at Florida State last year, saw him in dozens of practices. And, he was a guy that just could never pop for Florida State. Again, he's a freshman, so you have to weigh that. He was an early enrollee for them, but he'd have like one really good practice every 10 practices. And so, or maybe like every 6 practices. So, like, you would see it, but it wouldn't be consistent enough, and other players would mostly outshine him. But again, he was a freshman, and I don't think Florida State knew what they wanted him to do. They said, okay, you're cornerback. And then 4 practice later, okay, you're a safety. And then 4 practice later, maybe you're cornerback. And so, him moving around, I don't think that's something he enjoyed. And I think at A&M, they've said, hey, you're a cornerback, we're keeping you a quarterback, you're going to be a quarterback. And I think that could help him. And you see, I mean, this guy was a top 100 recruit of the 2022 class. He's got exceptional length, and you just like the way that this guy moves. He can almost be a receiver, but I think he's somebody that if you stick him at one position and develop him at that one position, that could be very beneficial for them. And with how much this team needs at cornerback, I think you can afford to keep him there. And to have him as a backup with the ceiling that he has, I think is awesome. Now, as soon as he starts, if he has to start this upcoming season, then, I don't know if he's ready yet. But you bake him in the oven, and maybe in a year or two, he could be an exceptional starter for you. He's got all the potential in the world, but I think he's got to stay in a position, learn that position, and develop in that way, not jump around too much.
No doubt. And I think it's the thing with him and where the transfer portal kind of comes in handy. He's already got a year on campus now. He's already going through, a lot of the freshmen are in his spot now of a good practice here, a good practice there, and learning to be more consistent. Now that he's heading into his second year, it makes a big difference. And he's going to have these practices to get through the spring, get through the fall, and feels like a guy, if you have an injury during the season, can turn to him, and he can give you solid reps, he can give you a solid game, and just provides some experience and some veteran um, leadership on the back end. So a lot of fascinating stories. We're going to be able to keep you guys in the loop. We'll speak to Jimbo Fisher later this week and hear from him on his thoughts, and be back next week again to kind of break down everything as A&M kind of gets closer towards the maroon and white spring game. Again, thanks to everybody for joining us, and we'll see you guys soon.